A lesser goblin challenged the hierarchy and overthrew the old leader. With a final blow, he declared himself the new chief of the horde, rejecting any objections with fury. Chaos ensued among the other goblins. The death of the former chief left a power vacuum and a trail of fear, creating widespread disorder in the tribe. Panic gripped the creatures. The brutality of the takeover generated a frenzy of uncertainty and terror among the horde members. Amidst the confusion, a solitary, hooded figure emerged. The goblin moved with a calmness that contrasted with the hysteria around him, drawing attention. The newcomer made a promise that silenced the crowd. He claimed to know the location of prey, offering a new focus for the hungry and disoriented horde. His promise was enough to unite the creatures. Driven by hunger and the hope of a hunt, the goblins decided to follow the mysterious guide. With the horde now on his heels, the hooded goblin took the lead. He guided them into the depths of the cave, confident in his purpose. However, not everyone trusted him blindly. Some goblins watched him with suspicion, questioning the intentions of that enigmatic figure who came out of nowhere. The makeshift leader noticed the stares on him. He felt the hostility from part of the group, but he was not intimidated and continued on his way. Suddenly, the hooded goblin stopped. What he saw ahead left him paralyzed, a scene that went against everything he expected to find. The prey was a human woman, terrified and surrounded by other goblins. The hooded goblin ran towards the sound of her desperate screams. The young woman begged for her life, completely defenseless against the cruelty of her captors. Her panic was evident as she struggled to break free. Filled with fury, the hooded goblin confronted the others. He ordered them to release the woman immediately, his voice laden with an unexpected and protective authority. His intervention shocked the aggressors. They stopped what they were doing and turned to the hooded goblin, confusion quickly turning to anger. Realizing that he was protecting the human, the horde turned against him. The goblin who was once their guide had now become their main enemy. The protagonist found himself surrounded by other goblins, desperately fighting to survive. His frustration grew with each passing second, cornered by the hostile creatures that attacked him mercilessly. Amidst the chaos, an overwhelming fury took over the young goblin. He refused to accept defeat, and his determination turned into an intense and focused rage. The creatures advanced with ferocity, trying to subdue him. Despite the imminent danger, the protagonist reaffirmed his will to live, refusing to die in that place. Suddenly, the dynamics of the fight changed. The goblins who were attacking him retreated, sensing a sudden and threatening shift in the protagonist's aura. Fear replaced their aggression. The young goblin reversed the situation, taking down one of his attackers. He stood over the creature's body, proving that he would not be an easy target for the others. Armed with a sharpened fragment, the protagonist assumed an offensive stance. His intention was clear. He would not only defend himself, but eliminate anyone who stood in his way. The sight of the makeshift weapon was enough to break the spirit of the remaining goblins. In a panic, they turned and fled, realizing that the young one was now the hunter. With the threat gone, the adrenaline from the battle left him. The protagonist felt the weight of fatigue and pain, exhausted by the effort of surviving the brutal attack. A woman who had been watching everything approached him. She comforted him, expressing gratitude and acknowledging that, unlike the others, he did not pose a threat to her. At that moment, something changed in his perception. An unfamiliar interface appeared before his eyes, announcing the initialization of a mysterious system. He stared, confused by the phenomenon. The protagonist remembered his previous life. He was not a goblin, but a human who was transported to that world after an accident, explaining his different nature from the other creatures. As the system continued to manifest, the other goblins cowered in fear. They did not fear the protagonist, but rather the presence of a much greater threat that was still alive. He reflected on the information the woman had given him in recent days. Through her, the young man began to understand the structure of that new world, including the divinities that governed it. He learned that this was a world full of dangers and monstrous creatures. Colossal beasts such as dragons were a constant reality and a threat to all its inhabitants. In addition to dragons, demons and other powerful entities also roamed those lands. Survival was a constant struggle against forces that far exceeded human comprehension. The goblin sat alone in the darkness of the cave. He seemed lost in thought, reflecting on his current situation and the memories of a distant past. A sudden sound startled him from his reverie. Turning around, the protagonist saw a young human woman who appeared to have just woken up, unaware of his watchful presence. He remembered when he was human. Acting as a protector in that monstrous form seemed like a bitter contradiction to the young man. The woman, however, expressed her deep admiration. For her, the goblin's actions made him someone very special and worthy of praise. The goblin remained silent, unable to accept the praise. Her words did not match the creature he believed he had become. She tried to convince him, insisting that the righteous holy order would accept him in the village. The goblin, however, listened with skepticism, doubting the goodness of humans. Despite his doubts, he felt responsible for the woman's safety. The goblin was her only protector in that dangerous place. Suddenly, the protagonist sensed a threat approaching. He warned the woman about the return of the other goblins, ordering her to hide immediately. A scout goblin, armed with a dagger, entered the cave. Hidden, the young woman watched the scene with a heavy heart, hoping not to be discovered. Right behind the scout, the real threat emerged. A wild goblin with red and hungry eyes, ready to attack without hesitation. The protagonist defeated the hostile creature. He then told the woman that her human saviors had finally arrived to rescue her. Elated, the young woman ran towards the entrance, certain it was the Holy Order. She called for him to come along, full of hope. Upon arriving, they witnessed the overwhelming strength of a knight. With a single strike of his sword, he decimated several goblins that stood in his way. The Knight of the Holy Order stood with authority and power. He was the embodiment of the hero that the woman idealized so much. Finally, the human knight and the goblin faced each other. The woman's rescue was over, but a new intense confrontation was about to begin. A knight arrived at the cave, finding a defeated goblin at his feet. In the background, a young pink-haired woman and another creature seemed to celebrate his arrival, relieved to have been saved. The girl's joy, however, vanished in an instant. She stared at the tip of the knight's sword, which was now pointed at her with a cold and murderous intent. When the knight attacked, the small goblin acted on instinct. He pushed the young woman out of the way, sacrificing himself to receive the fatal blow in her place. The impact of the blade violently threw them to the ground. The girl fell on top of the little creature's body that had protected her with its own life. Fallen, the goblin wondered if the knight's attack had been a terrible mistake, perhaps a confusion caused by the darkness of the cave. However, the knight's expression showed no regret or error. He stared down at them, his presence imposing and his decision unwavering. The man then addressed the wounded goblin, revealing that he knew its true identity. He called him by name, Kellia, with complete certainty in his voice. The pink-haired girl was completely shocked by the revelation. Confusion and fear took over her face as she processed the knight's words. In desperation, she grabbed the warrior's cloak, trying to explain the situation. The young woman pointed to the fallen goblin, claiming that he was the real culprit. She insisted that the knight was making a mistake. The girl tried to convince him that the little creature was not a threat, but rather her protector. Ignoring her pleas, the man raised his sword again, determined to finish off the goblin. The young woman clung to his leg in a last and futile attempt to stop him. On the ground, the goblin named Kellia showed no fear. Instead, the creature stared at its attacker with an expression of pure defiance and fury. The knight expressed his frustration with the unexpected interference. He delivered the final blow, annoyed by the complication that the girl had caused. Suddenly, a beam of golden light descended from the cave ceiling, interrupting the attack. Kellia looked up, surprised by the divine intervention. An imposing woman emerged, enveloped in light and accompanied by more knights. She appeared to be the leader of the group, wielding a visible power in her hands. A pink-haired woman begged for the priestess's help. Near them, a knight watched a small goblin trapped in a magical barrier, remaining on alert. The priestess approached and offered comfort to the frightened woman, helping her to stand up. Her gesture showed a compassion that seemed to calm the rescued young woman. Then the woman in white robes turned to the imprisoned creature. She tried to communicate with the goblin, wanting to know if it could understand her. The goblin remained silent, holding its club tightly. The creature seemed more scared than aggressive, just watching the group surrounding it with caution. The knight expressed his distrust, stating that goblins were stupid creatures. The priestess, however, smiled gently, suggesting that she saw something more in that being. The pink-haired woman asked, worried, if the goblin had hurt her. The priestess reassured her with a serene look, completely dispelling her fears. Feeling finally safe, the rescued young woman smiled with relief, grateful for the group's protection. The tension of the moment seemed to have disappeared completely. With eyes full of hope, the little goblin declared its willingness to join them. It seemed to see in the priestess an unexpected chance for salvation. With a simple snap of her fingers, the woman in white robes undid the magical barrier. The spell that held the goblin broke instantly, freeing the creature. The priestess invited the goblin to join them on their journey. The creature picked up its few belongings, ready to follow its new and unexpected benefactor. The goblin started to follow the woman, but suddenly, spectral hands emerged from the ground. An invisible threat manifested, surrounding the little creature. A sudden and violent attack was unleashed. The priestess's reflection amidst the explosion of energy revealed that she was the true source of the danger. The pink-haired woman lay lifeless on the ground, a victim of the unexpected betrayal. Shocked, the goblin looked at the body, paralyzed by what had just happened. Terror took over the goblin. The creature was sweating cold, unable to process the cruelty it had just witnessed. Its hope turned into pure dread. The priestess finally revealed her true nature. Her face became a shadow with bright red eyes, proving that her kindness was just a facade. The city bell rang, a call that echoed everywhere. It announced an important event, establishing a climate of tension over the relationship between humans and goblins. In the square, a knight of the Holy Order spoke to the crowd. He inflamed the citizens by reporting the damage caused by an alleged goblin attack, declaring that revenge had been taken in the name of the temple. The knight's words hit their mark. Anger and the desire for retaliation manifested on the face of one of the villagers, who expressed his hatred without restraint. The feeling of fury spread quickly through the crowd. The men raised their fists and shouted for revenge, demanding that the suffering be paid back in kind. The knight continued his fervent speech, reinforcing the role of the Holy Order as protector of the people. He positioned himself as the executor of justice against the creatures that threatened them. Then, a female figure wreathed in light appeared, presented as a symbol of the temple. She promised divine protection to all her followers, and the crowd hailed her with awe and hope. Away from the public eye, in a private office, the scene changed drastically. The luxurious and somber environment suggested that the truth behind the public sermon was very different. A scroll with notes revealed the speaker's secret thoughts. She considered the sermon a success, mocking the naivety of the people, who believed her words without question. The woman, once seen as a saint, revealed her true nature. With a cruel smile, she analyzed a vial with a red liquid, satisfied with the success of her manipulation. In a dungeon, the reality of the conflict was exposed. A tortured goblin cursed his tormentor, while a larger figure watched the scene with impotent rage. The blonde woman watched another captive goblin. She prepared for a new experiment, declaring her intention to test the effects of a poison on the creature. With disdain, the false priestess grabbed the goblin's face. She mocked the creature's audacity in questioning human justice, a farce that she herself had created. Her eyes gleamed with an evil energy. The woman reveled in the power she wielded over her victims, the mask of sanctity completely discarded in favor of her sadistic pleasure. She initiated a dark ritual, suspending the goblin in the air with her magic. The woman declared, with irony, that the creature should feel grateful for having a purpose in her experiment. The goblin's body was then imprisoned in a magic circle and consumed by an overwhelming energy. The ritual reached its climax, sacrificing another life for the woman's unholy goals. 2 human knights kicked the small fallen goblin. Beside them, a young elf lay motionless on the cold ground, defeated. The creature watched the scene, powerless in the face of the soldier's cruelty. He remembered what happened next. Captured and taken to the human village, the goblin was tortured by his captors, who refused to believe any of his words. His life ended amidst a ritual of overwhelming magic. An intense energy enveloped him, unraveling his existence as he screamed in agony, trapped inside the arcane circle. Then, everything became a dark void. The goblin's body plummeted through an infinite abyss, while fragments of the world shattered around him. It was the end. However, his consciousness awoke in a strange place, an ethereal and starry space. Confused, he floated, questioning whether he was somehow still alive. A translucent screen appeared before the young goblin. An unknown entity questioned him, presenting him with an interface with options he did not yet understand. Upon realizing what it meant, the protagonist's initial shock gave way to manic euphoria. A unique opportunity, an unimaginable power had been granted to him. With a crazed smile and eyes glowing red, he didn't hesitate. The goblin pressed the yes option with determination, accepting the pact and the chance to rewrite his destiny. He returned to his frail body, back in the cave he knew. The young goblin looked at his hands with some disdain, but accepted that this fresh start was better than nothing. A system window appeared, showing him information about the future. The protagonist analyzed the data, aware that the events leading to his death were about to repeat themselves. A sly smile formed on his face. He finally understood the nature of his new power. It was a simulation. This meant that he could see the future. With this knowledge, the goblin acted immediately. He ran through the cave with a clear purpose, determined to use his advantage to avoid his ruin and that of his people. The system then presented his first choice. He could alert the other goblins and fight the humans to earn more points, or abandon them to ensure his own survival. The image of Loader, the knight who tortured him, appeared in his mind. The protagonist pondered the decision, remembering the cruelty of his enemy and what would happen if he failed. The simulation showed the result of the first option: certain death. Facing Loader and his men directly, even with help, would only lead to the same tragic end. That plan was doomed to failure. The protagonist received points through the system. With a serious expression, he evaluated his options, aware that his next choice would be crucial for his survival. With total concentration, the young goblin decided to access the system's exchange shop. His focused eyes revealed that he already had a plan in mind and knew exactly what to look for. He found the perfect item, an elven dagger that cost all his points. The goblin acquired it without hesitation, immediately feeling the increase in power that the new weapon granted him. Equipped with his new dagger, the protagonist consulted the system again. He seemed to be searching for answers, trying to understand the rules of this world and his role in it. The system then revealed shocking information. The host's rebirth had altered the timeline. An image of a happy girl appeared, a memory of a past that might no longer exist. The revelation about the change in the timeline hit him. The idea of a peaceful life, which had once seemed impossible, was now linked to this new reality that he needed to understand. A slight smile of confidence appeared on his face. The young goblin accepted his new destiny, and the uncertainty gave way to a renewed determination to face whatever came next. His determination was soon put to the test. Two humans in armor approached his cave, forcing a confrontation that he knew was inevitable. The protagonist drew his blade, prepared for battle. His gaze was fierce and lethal, showing that he was no longer an easy prey, but a warrior defending his territory. He mentally prepared for the upcoming combat. At that moment, there was no other way out. Fighting was the only option to ensure his survival. Meanwhile, the knights heard a cry for help coming from the cave. They prepared for what they believed to be a rescue, certain that a maiden was in danger. However, the situation was a farce. One of the men was hiding a dagger, revealing that their intentions were not heroic, but part of a treacherous plan. His companion laughed, completely oblivious or complicit in the trap. The confidence of the two men was palpable, as they totally underestimated the situation they were getting into. The betrayal materialized in an instant. The knight who was laughing was caught by surprise and brutally eliminated by his own ally, who revealed his true nature. The goblin witnessed the act and did not hesitate. He advanced against the surviving human, challenging him to combat with a powerful blow from his sword. Two men in gray robes were ambushed on a rocky path. One of them fell, completely confused by the sudden attack, not understanding what was happening. The aggressor, a wild-looking creature, revealed a cruel smile. He seemed to savor his prey's fear before taking the next step. The creature advanced with impressive speed. The robed man, paralyzed by panic, barely had time to react to the imminent blow that was approaching. His companions were equally surprised. One of them shouted in shock upon identifying the attackers, while trying in vain to defend himself from the coordinated attack. The blade tore through the soldier's flesh without any mercy. A deep cut opened on his chest, and pain took over his terrified expression. The impact of the blow hurled him violently backward. The man fell to the ground, his body writhing in agony as life began to drain away. Fallen and seriously wounded, the soldier was shocked to hear his tormentor speak. The creature's ability to use human language made him even more terrified. In an act of desperation, the man begged for his life. He pleaded to be let go, appealing to the fact that he had a family waiting for him. As a last attempt, the soldier showed a watch with a picture of his wife and daughter. He hoped that the image of his family would spark some compassion. The creature watched the man and the photo in silence. The plea seemed to stop him for an instant, creating a tense pause in the deadly confrontation. Then, to the soldier's relief, the young aggressor turned and began to walk away. For a moment, it seemed that mercy had prevailed. The creature distanced itself from the fallen bodies of the men, leaving the scene of violence behind. The threat seemed to have finally ended. However, the hesitation disappeared from the young man's face. A new determination, cold and relentless, arose in his gaze. He wasn't finished yet. He returned to one of the fallen men and grabbed him tightly. The creature made it clear that this encounter was far from the last. At dusk, the aggressor dragged his prey away. The soldier's brief hope was crushed, and his fate sealed by the merciless creature. In a clearing in the forest, the result of a confrontation was evident. A warrior knelt in defeat near his fallen companions, while a woman in white watched the scene with cold indifference. The warrior looked at his companion, frustration etched on his face. He questioned how goblins could have caused such carnage, his voice full of disbelief and anger. The woman in white responded with a condescending smile. She suggested that only a mutant goblin could have accomplished such a feat, subtly mocking the weakness of her dead allies. Her insinuation hit the warrior like a blow, the humiliation of defeat mixed with fury upon realizing the contempt behind the woman's words. Unable to contain his anger, the man stood up and kicked the body of his comrade. He cursed the uselessness of his companions, who couldn't handle a single creature. Meanwhile, the woman's true nature manifested. A sadistic and disturbing smile appeared on her face, revealing a dark pleasure with the tragedy and the warrior's despair. Far away, the true survivor rested. The young goblin, exhausted and wounded, felt a momentary relief for having escaped alive from that deadly encounter. He needed to regain his strength to continue. The protagonist ate a fruit urgently, each bite an act of defiance to ensure his survival in those hostile lands. Images of the warrior and the sinister woman haunted his thoughts. The young man realized that his destiny was now linked to theirs, and that a new conflict was inevitable. Later, moving stealthily through the dark forest, the protagonist stopped suddenly. A noise in the bushes put him on high alert, preparing him for the imminent danger. Without hesitation, he decided to take the initiative. The young man jumped towards the source of the sound, with his dagger in hand, ready to attack and gain the advantage over any threat. However, he didn't find a monster or a soldier. To his surprise, he had knocked down another of his kind, a young goblin who screamed in fright upon being immobilized. The protagonist retreated quickly, but maintained his defensive stance. He watched the stranger with suspicion, the dagger still firm in his hand, trying to understand the situation. The young goblin remained on the ground, looking completely helpless. Fear was clear on her face as she looked at the protagonist, vulnerable and at his mercy. In a panic, the girl begged him not to hurt her. She explained that she was just looking for water, hoping that her words would appeal to his mercy. The protagonist was surprised by the creature's ability to formulate complete sentences. He watched her with renewed intensity, realizing that there was something unusual about her. An analysis revealed the little creature's status. A low-level goblin, but with intriguing titles like Messenger of God and Pure Soul. This confirmed the young man's suspicions. He approached the female goblin abruptly. The sudden approach and the hooded goblin's serious expression left her visibly frightened and recoiling. The young goblin fell to the ground, crying in fear. She expressed her dread, convinced that her boss would severely punish her for her failure to get water. Contrary to expectations, the protagonist gently touched her head. The unexpected gesture of comfort surprised her, interrupting her crying for an instant. Crouching, he warned her in a low voice. The protagonist explained that the noise would attract the attention of a dangerous group, indicating that they needed to remain silent. The female goblin looked at him, completely stunned. His genuine concern was something she clearly didn't expect, leaving her speechless. Moved by the kindness, she extended an invitation to him. The young goblin offered the stranger a place in her tribe as a way of thanking him for treating her with care. The protagonist's expression instantly changed to one of predatory malice. He grabbed her with a sinister smile, revealing that his intentions were not pure. Despite being intimidated, the female goblin agreed to take him. Completely unaware of the danger, she submitted to his grip, promising to guide him to the camp. XML. His calculating gaze and sly smile confirmed that everything was going according to his plan. The goblin's invitation was exactly the opportunity he was hoping for. Guided by the young goblin, the hooded goblin arrived at a camp. The place was full of tents and other goblins, confirming that this was the tribe she had mentioned. The stranger's arrival caused a stir. The goblins of the tribe mocked his clothes and appearance, treating him with immediate distrust and contempt. Ignoring the taunts, the protagonist kept the female goblin close to him. However, the other goblins began to approach with spears, surrounding the pair in a hostile manner. A group of goblin warriors advanced, weapons in hand and ready for combat. They made it clear that they would not tolerate the intruder's presence in their territory. One of the protagonist's companions shouted in panic. He desperately tried to warn everyone about someone's true identity, begging them not to act rashly. Meanwhile, the hooded protagonist remained beside his other companion. He kept her behind him in a protective gesture, while the young woman seemed visibly intimidated by the situation. The cause of the tension was an imposing goblin shaman. His red eyes glowed with a savage fury, making it clear that he was a dangerous threat and the leader of this group. The confrontation between the groups was about to escalate. The fate of the newcomers depended on the goblin leader's decision. The shaman pointed accusingly at the protagonist and his companion. He questioned them in front of his horde, who eagerly awaited an order to attack. A cruel and sadistic smile appeared on the shaman's face. He clearly reveled in the fear and power he wielded over the strangers. Then, the goblin leader gave his final order. He sentenced the protagonist to death, inciting his horde to kill and devour him. The horde celebrated with wild cries of joy. They surrounded the protagonist's companion, ready for the attack, celebrating the meat they would have to eat. Realizing there was no other way out, the protagonist prepared to fight. His bandaged hand firmly gripped a dagger that glowed with a blue energy. However, instead of attacking, the young man made a proposal. He interrupted the chaos, offering his skills as a blacksmith to make the tribe stronger. The unexpected offer intrigued the shaman. The goblin leader raised his hand, considering the promise of power and superior weapons. The shaman slowly approached to inspect the protagonist. The young man, in turn, remained still, staring at the leader without showing fear. With a gesture of intimidation, the goblin leader grabbed the protagonist's face. He examined him closely, testing his resolve and the truthfulness of his offer. The protagonist explained the origin of his abilities. He recalled his knowledge acquired in another world, presenting it as a valuable asset to the tribe. After inspecting the dagger, the shaman was convinced. He turned to his horde and declared that, with iron tools, they would become much more powerful. The young man's life was spared. A group of goblins celebrated their cruelty around a captured elf. They boasted of their newfound power with iron tools, treating the prisoner as nothing more than a meal. The goblin shaman, leader of the attack, displayed a sadistic smile. He reveled in the young woman's terror, savoring the moment before giving the final order. The helpless elf was brutally kicked by one of the goblins. Fear and pain took over her face, as she had no way to defend herself from the cowardly attack. In another moment, the shaman and his followers entered a tent. They seemed to report to a hooded figure who awaited them, whose identity remained hidden in the shadows. The hooded young man found the elf in her moment of despair. He comforted her with a gentle touch, an unexpected gesture that surprised her and brought a glimmer of hope. The stillness of the night was broken by the sound of a spear cutting through the air. The projectile flew towards its target, signaling the start of an inevitable confrontation. Later, the group of goblins patrolled the forest under the full moon. The hooded young man walked among them, his presence silent and observant amidst his hostile companions. Violence erupted without warning. A quick and decisive movement took down one of the goblins, who fell before he could even react to the surprise attack. The elf was subdued and beaten mercilessly. The goblins kicked her repeatedly, demonstrating their dominance and cruelty over the helpless prisoner. The horde reveled in the young woman's suffering. They shouted insults, accusing her of laziness and inciting each other to beat her to death. Suddenly, one of the attackers fell, struck by a well-aimed projectile. The hooded young man emerged from the shadows, interrupting the torture to protect the elf. The hooded figure stared at the remaining goblins. His posture was a silent threat, making it clear that the aggression was over, and that he was the new obstacle. Fear gripped the goblins. The unexpected arrival and the newcomer's threatening aura paralyzed them, replacing their arrogance with pure dread. Upon recognizing the hooded young man, the goblins panicked. They accused him of treason and decided to flee to save their own lives, abandoning their victim. The protagonist watched the escape. He reflected on the treacherous nature of goblins, aware that even if he helped them, his fate would be to be killed by them. The system revealed a new possibility. With a female goblin, the protagonist could achieve legendary power. He watched the frightened creature at his feet, pondering that unexpected path. The female goblin, however, was terrified and began to cry. Instead of acting violently, the young man tried to calm her, demonstrating surprising compassion for the creature. So as not to intimidate her, the hooded goblin knelt down. He put himself on the same level as her, a gesture that signaled his peaceful intentions and his empathy. Then, the protagonist made a solemn promise. He guaranteed that he would protect her, offering food and a safe home if she stayed with him. The young goblin reacted with disbelief and hope. The young man's expression was one of pure determination. This promise was not empty. He was willing to fight to keep his word and defend her from any threat. His words deeply impacted her. The fear in the female goblin's eyes gave way to a glimmer of trust, realizing the sincerity in her protector's offer. The two stared at each other, and the distance between them lessened. A mutual understanding was established at that moment, sealing the pact he had proposed. The female goblin showed her acceptance with a shy but expectant look. She decided to trust him and the future that the young man had promised. The protagonist smiled, pleased with her decision. He reassured her, confirming that her choice was the right one and that she would be safe by his side. The female goblin's mind went into a complete whirlwind. The intensity of that moment completely overwhelmed her, leaving her stunned and without reaction. Then, the hooded goblin kissed her. The act sealed both of their fates, initiating the transformation that the system had announced moments before. After the kiss, the female goblin was completely stunned. The experience left her breathless, lost in a mixture of surprise and ecstasy. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't of sadness. They were the result of an overwhelming emotion, a relief at finally finding safety and affection. While she was consumed by emotion, a system notification popped up. The protagonist had surpassed a limit and received a significant increase in his combat attributes. The change began to manifest physically. The protagonist's body contorted and his muscles expanded, beginning the transformation into a much more powerful form. The protagonist felt the power flow through his transformed body. He realized that not only had his level increased, but his very form had evolved, drastically increasing his chances of victory in future confrontations. After assessing his new power, the young man picked up a piece of cloth from the ground. He prepared for what was to come, now with more resources at his disposal. He approached the female goblin and covered her with the cloth, a gesture of care and protection. The young woman expressed her gratitude, surprised by his kindness amidst the chaos. Suddenly, a distant scream that mixed panic and maniacal laughter broke the calm. The sound indicated an imminent and cruel danger rapidly approaching them. The source of the noise was revealed. A demonic wolf was attacking a helpless goblin. The small creature, terrified, screamed about the presence of the wild beasts that had found them. The protagonist watched the scene in astonishment. Realizing that the goblin was carrying iron ore, he understood the real reason for the wolves' attack on that location. Without hesitation, the young man stood in front of the female goblin, wielding his knife. He was determined to fulfill his promise to protect her, no matter what the enemy. The demonic wolf advanced mercilessly. In an instant, the creature snapped up the little goblin, who had no chance of escaping the beast's fatal attack. While the beast was distracted with its prey, the protagonist saw his opportunity. He shot towards the wolf, moving with impressive speed through the dark forest. The young man leaped onto the demonic wolf with agility. He plunged his blade into the beast's neck, surprising it in a daring and precise attack, to the shock of the surviving goblin. The attack was devastating. The huge beast fell lifeless to the ground, while the goblin carrying the ore stared, stunned, at the protagonist's display of strength. With the wolf defeated, the protagonist turned to face the other goblin. His posture and the aura emanating from him made it clear that he was now in command of the situation. With a confident smile, he took the iron ore from the frightened goblin. The valuable resource now belonged to him, a reward for his bravery and power. The battle had ended as quickly as it began. The protagonist established himself as the dominant force, completely changing the power dynamic between the survivors of that encounter. Later, in a new setting, the young man felt he had done enough for now. With the resources in hand and safety secured, he prepared for the next step. Lin Tian stared at the distrustful goblins surrounding him. The creatures seemed agitated and demanded answers about his presence there. One of the goblins used the dead wolf as proof. He explained to the others that Lin Tian's weapon was powerful and real, demonstrating the newcomer's ability. Another goblin defended Lin Tian vehemently. He confirmed that the young man used the weapon to kill the magic wolf and save them, proving his good faith. Lin Tian's bandaged hand gripped the wooden handle tightly. He prepared to prove his worth to the entire tribe once and for all. The protagonist raised a newly made spear and offered to arm the others. The goblins reacted with enthusiasm, accepting the proposal in unison. The goblin chief, Gaga, watched the interaction carefully. His tribe's reaction to Lin Tian's offer did not go unnoticed. A slight smile appeared on Gaga's face. The stranger's demonstration of skill piqued his interest, and he began to formulate a plan. The chief's smile widened, revealing his cunning nature. He saw a clear opportunity in Lin Tian's presence and decided to test his limits. Gaga then imposed a condition for Lin Tian to stay. He demanded the production of 50 weapons in 2 days, a challenge that the young man accepted. Within the deadline, a large overturned basket revealed dozens of spears ready. The task, which seemed impossible, was completed successfully. Lin Tian presented the finished weapons to the tribe. He announced that he had fulfilled his part of the agreement to the goblin's celebration. The goblin chief smiled with evident satisfaction. Lin Tian not only met the challenge, but also exceeded Gaga's expectations. Gaga declared a feast to celebrate the occasion. He announced that everyone would feast on meat to celebrate Lin Tian's entry into the tribe. A large bonfire was lit in the center of the camp. Its tall flames symbolized the beginning of the celebration and the acceptance of the new member. A whole pig was roasted for the tribe's banquet. The reward for Lin Tian's work was shared by all, sealing their new alliance. A young goblin offered Lin Tian a special gift, a portion of food that she said had been saved by the priest. She handed it over with a careful gesture, explaining its importance. Lin Tian accepted and ate the gift. However, a violent and unexpected reaction took over his body, reflected in a gaze that filled with a sudden fury. The pain intensified rapidly. The young goblin gritted his teeth, fighting against the transformation that consumed him from within, altering his very nature. He fell to his knees, unable to bear the agony. The young one, frightened by the sudden change, questioned what was happening to him, full of concern. As she tried to help him, the young goblin realized they were no longer alone. A new presence emerged from the darkness of the forest, interrupting the moment of panic. An imposing goblin shaman appeared before them, with a manic look. He confronted them with a hostile accusation, making it clear that their presence there was unwelcome. Without hesitation, the leader extended his hand with sharp claws towards the young goblin. His intention was clearly aggressive and violent. He grabbed her tightly, and terror took over the young goblin's face. The goblin shaman, now wearing a skull as a mask, held her as his prisoner. The situation worsened when one of his claws pierced her neck, causing blood to flow. The threat became a real and lethal aggression. Suddenly, a quick movement cut through the air. The shaman's hand was severed in a single precise blow, interrupting his brutal attack. The echo of the blow resonated through the dark clearing. The speed of the attack was so great that it left only a trace in the air, marking the beginning of the retaliation. The fight began. Lin Tian, now recovered and standing, faced the shaman to protect the fallen young one. The other goblins watched the confrontation unfold. Wounded and furious, the shaman looked at his severed arm. The pain and humiliation fueled his rage against the opponent who dared to challenge him. In contrast, Lin Tian displayed a confident smile. Wielding a sharp blade, the protagonist revealed a new and dangerous side, ready for combat. The shaman replaced his skull mask. The injured leader prepared for battle, facing his challenger with renewed hatred. An imposing goblin chief launched a wild attack against an elf. The warrior, caught off guard in the dark forest, braced for impact, aware of his opponent's overwhelming strength. However, the elf demonstrated remarkable agility. He dodged the blow and, using the enemy's momentum, positioned himself for a quick and precise counterattack, plunging his blade into the creature's back. Meanwhile, the protagonist, now transformed, unleashed an overwhelming power. With a single blow imbued with blue energy, he decapitated a goblin, displaying a strength he did not possess before. The blow was instantaneous and brutal. The goblin's head flew, his expression frozen in pure terror, while the blood marked the end of his life and the beginning of a new era of power. The surviving goblins witnessed the display of strength and retreated, completely terrified. The creature they once saw as an equal now stood over them as a new, undisputed master. Elsewhere, a sinister-looking elf watched his goblin subordinates. The creatures trembled before him, awaiting orders with a mixture of fear and forced loyalty, completely subjugated. The traitorous elf raised his dagger and gave a clear and furious order. He incited the goblins to rise up and attack, directing the horde's fury against a common enemy. To motivate them, the leader presented a captured elf as a prize. He promised an endless feast to seal his alliance with the creatures, who celebrated the cruel promise with wild howls. Back in the present, the protagonist turned to the female goblin he was protecting. He offered her the body of the defeated chief, a gesture that symbolically transferred power and victory. The female goblin accepted the offer. With newfound fury, she lunged at the corpse, releasing all her frustration and fear on the fallen enemy, while the others advanced. Together, the protagonist and his partner watched the horde. The creatures now stared at them with a new reverence. The old order had fallen, and a new power, born of violence and protection, was established. The traitorous elf revealed the true extent of his ambition. Dominating the goblins was only the beginning of his revenge. His dark plan involved using the elves to create stronger future generations. Far away, a blonde-haired elf moved stealthily through the forest. Her expression was one of urgency and determination, indicating that she was on a dangerous mission, aware of the imminent danger. Her destination was a magnificent elven city, built in harmony with nature. The tranquility of the place contrasted with the brutality of the forest, a home she desperately needed to protect. The scout elf wasted no time on formalities upon arrival. She passed a guard, her grave expression conveying the urgency of the news she carried. The danger she discovered needed to be reported immediately. In the luxurious home of the elves, the tribe leader enjoyed her pleasures. She called for one of her subordinates, Kasana, interrupting the leisure moment to deal with important matters. The elf leader listened attentively to a report, her expression turning serious. The tranquility of the environment was broken by a concern that demanded her immediate attention. Kasana reported disturbing events in the forest. She found the carcass of a giant bear, a creature that goblins normally couldn't defeat, indicating that something had changed. The leader concluded that the goblin population had recovered. She then ordered Kasana to lead a purge, but with the specific instruction not to annihilate all of them. The reason for the order was revealed. The hearts of the goblins served as a tonic for the male elves. Upon hearing her mother's explanation, Kasana was visibly embarrassed and shocked. To motivate her, the mother offered Kasana an intimate reward. Completely embarrassed, the young elf promised to investigate the situation immediately and fled from her leader's presence. Meanwhile, in the forest, the protagonist gathered with his horde. Around the campfire, he gave clear orders for everyone to prepare their weapons for an imminent attack against the elves. The horde responded enthusiastically, confirming that the weapons were ready. The goblin leader remained crouched, watching his followers mobilize, his calm contrasting with the agitation around him. The protagonist did not act impulsively. He used twigs to calculate the enemy's strength, estimating the number of elves based on their dwellings. His approach was methodical and strategic. With the plan drawn up, the leader stood up and announced the start of the hunt. He declared that they would hunt the monsters of the forest, and the horde responded with shouts of approval, ready to follow him. The hunt began. After defeating a powerful beast, the protagonist felt a new strength surge within him. A system notification confirmed that he had acquired a new skill through combat. The goblin horde followed their leader's example, facing various creatures. Upon defeating stone monsters, they were also rewarded with new skills, strengthening their defense for war. No monster was a match for the united horde. They subdued a giant serpent, and with the victory they gained yet another skill, this time one that granted them the power of poison. The result of the intensive training was clear. The status of a common goblin revealed an extraordinary growth in level and power, with new titles that proved their effectiveness in battle. Now stronger and leading an improved army, the protagonist prepared for the confrontation. The true target of his hunt, the elves, was finally within his reach. The battle was about to begin. The protagonist watched the forest, a confident smile on his face. He remembered a time when that confidence had been his downfall, a mistake he wouldn't make again. In his memory, an army of goblins marched against the enemy tribe, blinded by arrogance and certainty of victory. They were walking straight into destruction. The memory of the ambush was vivid. The enemies waited in the trees, turning the confident attack into a massacre. Their strategy had been completely flawed. The image of the humiliating defeat remained in his mind. He and his people were completely overwhelmed, a failure that haunted him to this day. However, this memory did not bring despair, but rather a cold determination. The protagonist focused his thoughts on the present, determined to rewrite history. The young goblin expanded his senses, sharpened by the forest. He knew his enemies were nearby and concentrated to find their exact location. Then, he found them. Several presences moved quickly between the trees. The protagonist had located the enemy scouts before they could escape. The elven scouts fled in panic. They had discovered the goblins' attack plan and were running to alert their leader, unaware that it was already too late. Suddenly, swift projectiles cut through the air towards the fleeing scouts. The protagonist's counterattack had begun, precise and lethal. One of the scouts was hit squarely, her escape abruptly interrupted. Before she could react, a dark hand reached her. The elf fell to the ground, paralyzed and surrounded by her defeated companions. She realized she couldn't move a muscle, completely at the mercy of her captors. As a goblin approached, the scout felt a strange numbness take over her body. She understood the terrible truth. The arrows were poisoned. The protagonist emerged from the shadows, staring at the prisoner. He commented with satisfaction that her appearance was opportune, revealing that everything was part of his plan. The young goblin watched the fallen elf with a look of dark triumph. The capture of the scout was the first victory in his carefully planned revenge.